Welcome back to the Piano Dojo. It's been a minute, but I think we are ready to move on. Up until this point, we have learned a lot of vocabulary. In fact, I would even say we learned all the vocabulary. I don't really think that there is such a thing as advanced music theory, in that there is like a whole other set of advanced vocabulary that you have to learn. It's more so that at this point, we're going to take all the basic vocabulary that we've learned and we're going to put it together in lots of different ways, and that is sort of what constitutes advanced music theory. For this review series, we're going to continue doing our rhythm warm-ups. We're going to start today off with a rhythm warm-up, although we are going to be exploring 3/4 time, since up until this point, we have mostly done everything in 4/4. Then we're going to take all of the 4-note chord stuff that we've learned up until this point, and if you need to review any of that, remember, go back to any of the videos in this channel and you can thoroughly digest any one of those shapes, whether it's major sevenths, dominant sevenths, minor sevenths, half diminished, or fully diminished sevenths, right? We want to make sure that we've got those down because we are going to today be putting them together. Today is a really exciting exercise. We're going to be looking at a progression that we've talked about before called the 2-5-1, a very famous progression. You know, we all know that the 5 to the 1 is the most famous progression, and the 2 right before the 5 is probably the next most well-known thing that you could do, all right? So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be applying the modes that we've learned so far with the chords that we've learned so far, and we're going to see how actually everything that we've learned is going to simplify our lives, all right? So modes, although maybe it seemed like a lot at first when you were trying to remember which mode went with which chord, at this point, we're going to see that that process is meant to simplify our lives, all right? And then don't forget that just like when we did inversion blending with 3-note chords, because the 2, the 5, and the 1 chord are adjacent to each other on the circle of fifths, that inversion blending is going to be very easy to do with these chords, which is another reason why they are such a popular progression. So we're going to be doing some inversion blending with the 4-note chords and then applying all of the applicable modes to those. And last but not least, we're going to do some reading. So for this lesson, I wrote a sort of a standard chord chart notation tune called Whistle This, and it's going to use a lot of the 2-5-1 things that we're going to be working on in our exercise today. So looking forward to getting to all of that. But first, as always, thank you so much for visiting this channel. If you would like to help support the Piano Dojo, you can do so by subscribing to this channel or sharing it with anybody you know who is looking for answers about the piano. Also, please feel free to visit my website where you can find lots of cool Piano Dojo stuff, including everything that you see on any Piano Dojo episode. Let's head over to the drum and get rhythmically warmed up. Up until this point in our rhythm warm-ups, we've gotten very good at 8th note syncopation, triplets, and 16th note syncopation. However, all of these have been done in 4/4 time, and we have yet to look at 3/4 time, which means 3 quarter notes per measure or 3 downbeats per measure. So we're going to start out with the next few rhythm warm-ups being just 8th note syncopation in 3/4 time. We're going to get started today with line 1. Our metronome is going to be set at 50 BPM, and that's going to represent the downbeat. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Get ready to switch your hands here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Top line hands together. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3 and. As you can see, a measure of 3/4 feels a little bit smaller than a measure of 4/4. Sometimes we get really used to phrasing in a certain way, especially in anything that's divisible by 2. But 3/4 is a little different, so it's good that we're going over this. We're going to go ahead and speed our metronome up now to 55 BPM. We'll look at line 2, and now the metronome is going to represent the upbeat. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1. Get ready to change your hands to your left hand on top. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Hands together, top line. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. For line 3, we're going to speed up to 60 BPM. However, we're going to take away some of the training wheels of our metronome. We're going to cut it in a third. All right, so we're going to have our metronome at 20 BPM, and it will represent the very first downbeat of each measure, although we will be moving at 60 BPM. All right, so the metronome is just on beat 1 of every measure. Here we go. One, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Change your hands. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Top line, hands together. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Finally, for line 4, we're going to speed our metronome up. Now, because of this multiples of 3 that we're doing right now, we are going to try to get as close to 70 as we can, and so we're going to go just underneath it at 69 BPM. All right, so our metronome will be set to 23 BPM. We'll be moving at 69 BPM, and let's now imagine, instead of this click being the first downbeat, let's make it the second downbeat. All right, so without further ado, here we go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Switch. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Top line. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Not much to that one, but sometimes the ones with the most space are the most difficult. Now that we are rhythmically warmed up, let's head back over to the piano and check out today's lesson. Let's jump into our theory lesson today. So as I mentioned in the intro, the 2-5-1 is a very popular progression, and that is probably due to the fact that the tonal centers of each of those chords are adjacent to each other on the circle. So for example, if C major was our 1 chord, our minor 2 would be D, our 5-7 would be G, and then our 1 would be C, right? And as you can see, all of those tonal centers are adjacent to each other on the circle, which means that there's lots of juicy voice leading possibilities for us and ways that we can simplify our scale choices using modes. So I've got the exercise written out for us right here. This is what it looks like. All right, so as we mentioned, we have our D minor, we have our G7, we have our C major 7. Now each of those is a 4-note chord that we've studied, the minor 7, the dominant 7, and the major 7. And let's start by looking down at the left hand. And as we can see, we have two chords in root position, and the middle chord is going to be in an inversion, okay? And the reason is because of the inherent voice leading in this. Between these two chords, we are going to have the top two voices moving down, while the bottom two voices are going to stay the same. And then we're going to have those bottom two voices move down, while those top two voices are going to stay the same. Let's look at this on the piano. As we see on the exercise, we're going to be starting out with our D minor 7 in a root position. Now, as I mentioned, when we voice lead that or inversion one that to become a G dominant 7th chord, the bottom two notes are going to stay the same, while the top two notes are going to move down to a G and a B. Okay, so that's pretty easy right there, pretty easy motion, just moving those two notes like so. And what that sounds like is this. All right, and then to get to C major 7, we're going to keep the top two notes, we're going to move the bottom two notes. So again, two notes stay the same, and two notes are going to move, one by a whole step and one by a half step. And the whole process together is going to look like this. Or if you want to articulate all of the notes each time, like this. Now here's the part where it gets really simple. Let's talk about the modes that go with these chords. We know that with our D minor 7, we were going to be using a Dorian scale, which means from D to D simply in the key of C, our parent key. Now this is the beautiful thing about how modes apply to the 251, is that the G7 mode, our G Mixolydian mode, is also from G to G in the key of our parent key, which is C. And then of course, the Ionian mode, also known as the major mode, is just the C major scale. So even though it looks like we're playing three different scales here, we're actually just playing one, and that is the parent scale, the 1, right? So we're playing from in the key of C major, but we're starting in three different places. We're starting from the 2, we're starting from the 5, and then we're starting from the 1. Also, notice that each time we are only going to ascend. The cool thing about ascending in the way that we've written on this exercise is that once you get to the top of the scale, notice where your thumb is. It's ready to play the next scale. Stop and look where your thumb is. It's ready to play the next scale. So not only do you only have to choose one scale for all three of these modes, but also the end of each mode sets you up for the beginning of the next one, right? So we simply have, now your thumb is already right here, and then your thumb is already right here. Now, the only thing left to do is to put your hands together like so. And there you have it. For today's theory exercise, we're going to take a look at this exercise in three different keys. We're going to work on it in the key of C, the key of G, and the key of D. We'll go ahead and start with our C major. The key of G, starting on A minor 7, to D dominant 7, and finally G major 7. D, we're going to start on E minor 7, then we're going to go to A dominant 7, and then D major 7. For today's reading, we're going to take a look at a tune I wrote called Whistle This. A little fun factoid about this is I got the idea for this tune when I was taking a walk, and I was walking through a trail through the woods, and I heard a bird, and it was singing a really cool little melody. Not this exact melody, just a little piece of it. So I took out my phone and I just whistled the melody that came to my mind from hearing the bird, and therefore we get whistle this, right? Because it was originally whistled into a phone from hearing a bird whistle. But anyways, that's where the melody comes from. But let's see how then we take this raw idea and we sort of, what we might say, standardize it, right? So I did use the word standard, and that's a very important word that we hear a lot in jazz. Jazz standards are not only like a body of tunes that everybody knows and can play, but it's also sort of a format. Like, you know, when I write a song like a standard, what I mean is formally, first of all, this is probably the most popular form where you have an A section that has 8 measures with a repeat. So therefore our first A section is technically 16 measures. We would call that A. And then we have a B section that is also 8 measures, but only 8 measures with no repeat. And then finally, we have a final return to the A section, which is another 8 measures. So we have what we call the A form, which results in 32 measures. Now, within each of these measures, we can see that we have quite a bit of 2-5-1 activity. And you can also see that sometimes, oddly enough, the 2-5s don't always resolve directly to a 1. For example, here we have a 2-5 technically to the key of G, but instead of turning into G, what ends up happening is we do sort of this common tone modulation where instead of playing a D dominant 7, I began playing a D minor 7, which then sets me up for a 2-5 into our actual key, which is C major. It's kind of a little misdirection. As a composer, you know, you don't always want to start out right on the 1. We want to kind of delay that gratification for a few measures before, aha, yes, we are in fact in the key of C. Now, here's the thing. You can't always construct a piece completely out of one progression. Sometimes you need to throw in a few different skips, harmonically speaking, in order to break it up and add some variation. So as you can see right here, the jump up a major third is a little bit of, you know, it's unusual because also technically this should be an E minor 7, but you'll notice it's an E dominant 7. And hey, that is the composer's choice right there, right? That is where the substance of the tune comes from. It's not always about how well did you follow the rules, but also how well did you bend the rules a little bit, right? So we bent the rules a little bit to add some flavor. And then of course, we bring it home with another 2-5-1, and then we do hit, at the repeat, we hit this 5-7 to get us back over here to our relative minor, all right? Now, once we get to the second ending, instead of turning us back around to the A minor, it's going to point us to F major 7, because that's the 4. And, you know, I wasn't being too creative here. It is very typical in any song, pretty much in any style, that when you want to create a new section of a piece and you want to slightly move to a different tonal center, that it's probably going to be either the 4 or the 5, and here we went to the 4. We didn't really use 2-5-1s here, and that's kind of a choice of contrast. You know, the B section is meant to contrast the tune, and instead of this quick pace 2-5, 2-5, 2-5 thing that has been going on, we sort of slowed down what we call the harmonic rhythm in these first 4 measures, although you will see that the harmonic rhythm does pick back up into the normal thing that we have been seeing in order to get us back to our final A section. All right, now watch out when we do get to that final A section. The only thing that's different is our end, okay? And yes, I really broke the rules here because I like this sound, and I chose to throw in a key that has nothing to do with C major, and that's A flat. The thing that they do share is that A flat major also has a C in it, right? And so there's your justification. Both of these chords technically contain C. We have this 5. We have a deceptive cadence. Instead of landing you right onto the 1, we're going to land in a very odd place, and then we're going to quickly resolve that, which is going to give us a very hip, cool sound, hopefully. So there we are. The theory of this piece is not too complicated. A lot of 2-5-1s. We have an A, B, A, 32 measure form. And now the only thing left to do is talk about what we're going to do with our left hand. What we're going to do today is create a simple accompaniment, because you don't always have to create something super fancy. Sometimes a simple accompaniment works really well. We're going to use the inversion blending that we worked on in our lesson, okay? So for example, I'm going to go ahead and start on this A minor 7 right here. The reason being that I want to keep my thumb close to middle C, because that is my rule of thumb, is I'd like to have middle C incorporated in this. I think that this is a nice sounding register right here. And when you blend that back and forth between your D dominant 7, I think it sounds pretty nice. And then when that becomes a D minor 7, and we go to our G, finally it allows you to arrive at that C major 7 in root position at measure 5, if we go ahead and start here on this A minor. Again, let's see how that worked. We started with our A minor 7 and we went to our D7. We went back to the A minor, back to the D7. Then the D7 becomes D minor 7 by lowering this F sharp to an F natural. And we're going to go back and forth between that and G7. Here's our D minor 7. Here's our G7, and finally we're going to lower our bottom 2 voices to get us to C major 7. Now here's the deal. Getting up to the E7, although it is not adjacent on the circle, there's still lots of great voice leading. For example, we can actually keep these 2 voices the same and move this voice up and this voice up, and now we have our E7. So although they're not adjacent chords, there's still a lot of common tones and simple voice leading. And that sort of lets us walk our hand up from C to E, and then back up to our D minor, our G7, and back down to C. And of course, working our hand back up, we have our E dominant 7, which is going to lead us back to the second 8 measures of the A section, right? Now, let's take a look. If we go back to that measure 5, and we, instead of approaching the first ending, we approach the second ending. We have our C major, we have our voice leading to get up to E dominant 7, then we're going to convert that to our D minor 7 and our G7. Well, at this point, we now need to convert our G dominant 7 into a G minor 7 for the second ending. And the only thing you have to change for that is the Mi, the third note of the chord, which is B, to B flat. And then we can do our simple voice leading to get to a C dominant 7. Now here's the deal. Logically, the best place to go for this would be right here for F major 7. But look at this, our rule of thumb is being a little bit broken right here. We're out of bounds of our middle C, and if you just listen to that, it's starting to get a little bit muddy. So one of the things about voice leading is it tends to move you down, and every now and then you break that voice leading and you bring yourself back up so that you don't continually wander into the nether regions of the bass. So what I would recommend here is start on this G minor 7, then voice lead down to our root position C dominant 7, and then break our rule and jump ourselves back up to a root position F major 7 for our bridge. Then we're going to start voice leading back down as it tends to do. So getting to our B dominant 7 would be best right there. Let's look at that again. We're going to bring down the top 3 notes while keeping the bottom note the same. And then in order to get to C major 7, again, in this case we're going to have to move all of our voices, but not by very much. The bottom 2 voices are going to move down, and the top 2 voices are going to move in. Okay, so from B dominant 7 to C, kind of a cool sound. And then to get to A7, you actually get to keep 2 voices the same while you move these 2 voices out in contrary motion to get to an A dominant 7. Now again, at this point, you could go down to a root position D dominant 7. Or if you wanted to move up to this one, that would be okay. This is where you get to use your ear and choose which one you want to do. For right now, I'm going to go to this root position one, which is then going to bring me to my root position D minor 7, my G7, and now I'm going to end up moving back up to my A minor 7, to my D7, D minor, and G7. Okie dokie. So that is how I like to think about using just simple 4-note chords, using inversion blending in order to create an accompaniment for my left hand. And remember that we want to use good voice leading every now and then when you get too far down, which you may know, because our rule of thumb says try to keep it close to middle C. So when you get too far down from there, you can jump your way back up, because voice leading does tend to move us down the piano. The last thing I'll say about Whistle This before we jump into it is that just like any other standard, a very standard thing to do is once you finish the melody to loop back around to the very beginning of the tune and improvise a melody over the chord changes. I'm not going to do that today. Today we're just going to talk about the tune itself. However, once this tune is released onto the next Piano Dojo Originals album, there will be an improvisation section there. So, you know, keep an eye out for that as always. Let's go ahead and check out this tune.